Happy Saturday, y'all. Saturday, December 12th. I actually looked at the calendar today before starting our video. We are going to cover Lindsay Gibson's Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, Chapter 2. Hopefully you have your copy and you're following along with us today. If not, just listen along. You may want a journal to be able to track the thoughts that you have while you listen to me talk about this book. I know that it was super helpful for me. If you're a client, we can definitely talk through it. If you're not a client or you're interested or you just want to figure out whether you'd like our services, check out our site, www.findingyourselfsatx.com, and contact us. First consult is always free, and so you have nothing to lose. All right, with that, we'll get started. As always, I'll put on my old lady glasses, which are a little dirty today. And we'll start with Chapter 2. Okay, sorry guys, it's taking me a second. I hope you guys are doing fine and you had a good week. I'm in San Antonio, Texas, so the weather's beautiful. It's like 70 degrees outside. I think I need the sweater that I'm wearing today. Hopefully gonna take a walk here soon. It's, 2020 with quarantine and everything, but trying to make the best of it. I did get this cool Chinese background. I hope you guys like it. Chinese divider. Amazon. So if y'all want something the same, if you do videos or whatever. All right. Chapter 2, Recognizing the Emotionally Immature Parent. It can be hard to look at your parents objectively because it might feel like you're betraying them, but that isn't the motive here. In this book, our mission is not to disrespect or betray your parents, but to finally see them objectively. I hope you'll see that the discussions of emotionally immature parents in this book are informed by a deep understanding of the reasons for their limitations. As you'll see, much of their immature, hurtful behavior is unintentional. By viewing these and other aspects of your parents more dispassionately, you can understand things about yourself and your history that you might not have thought about before. Most signs of emotional immaturity are beyond a person's conscious control, and most emotionally immature parents have no awareness of how they've affected their children. We aren't trying to blame these parents, but to understand why they are the way they are. My hope is that any new insights about your parents you gain from reading this book will have the result of radically increasing your own self-awareness and emotional freedom. Fortunately, as adults, we have the ability and independence to assess whether our parents can really give us the care and understanding we desire. To judge this objectively, it's important to understand not just your parents' superficial behavioral characteristics, but also their underlying emotional framework. Once you understand these deeper traits and learn what to expect from your parents and how to label their behaviors, you're far less likely to be caught unaware by their limitations. Keep in mind that your thoughts about your parents are private. They may never know what you've gotten from this book, nor do they need to. The goal is for you to gain the self-confidence that comes from knowing the truth of your own story. You aren't betraying your parents by seeing them accurately. Thinking about them objectively can't hurt them, but it can help you. As you saw in the previous chapter, emotionally immature parents can have devastating impacts on their children's self-esteem and relationships in adulthood. The effects can range from mild to severe, depending on the parent's level of immaturity, but the net effect is the same. The children feel emotionally unseen and lonely. This erodes their children's sense of their own lovability and can lead to excessive caution about emotional intimacy with others. Exercise. Assessing your parents' emotional immaturity. So this part of the book, if you have your own copy, right, you can fill it out. You can also pause the video, right, in your journal. You can write this down and fill it out. The first time that I was reading this book, it was through Audible. And so I would just pause the audio and do the exercise. So hopefully you guys have your own copy, you're following along. If not, this is a recorded video, so pause as you need to. Exercise. Assessing your parents' emotional immaturity. Human emotional immaturity has been studied for a long time. However, over the years, it has lost ground to an increasing focus on symptoms and clinical diagnosis, using a medical disease model to quantify behaviors as illnesses suitable for insurance reimbursement. But in terms of a deep understanding of people, assessing emotional immaturity is often far more useful, as you're likely to discover when reading this chapter and by completing this exercise. Read through the following statements and check any that describe your parent. If you'd like to fill out this assessment for more than one parent or step-parent, use the downloadable version of this exercise available at http://www.newharbinger.com/31700. See the back of the book for instructions on how to access it. Okay, here goes. My parent often overreacted to relatively minor things. My parent didn't express much empathy or emotional awareness. When it came to emotional closeness and feelings, my parent seemed uncomfortable and didn't go there. My parent was often irritated by individual differences or different points of view. When I was growing up, my parent used me as a confidant, but wasn't a confidant for me. My parent often said and did things without thinking about people's feelings. I didn't get much attention or sympathy from my parent, except maybe when I was really sick. My parent was inconsistent, sometimes wise, sometimes unreasonable. If I became upset, my parent either said something superficial and unhelpful or got angry and sarcastic. Conversations mostly centered on my parents' interests. Even polite disagreement could make my parent very defensive. It was deflating to tell my parents about my success because it didn't seem to matter. Facts and logic were no match for my parents' opinions. My parent wasn't self-reflective and rarely looked at his or her role in a problem. My parent tended to be a black and white thinker and unreceptive to new ideas. How many of these statements describe your parent? Since all of these items are potential signs of emotional immaturity, checking more than one suggests you very well may have been dealing with an emotionally immature parent. Personality pattern versus temporary emotional regression. There's a difference between a pattern of emotional immaturity and a temporary emotional regression. Anyone can briefly lose emotional control or become impulsive when tired or stressed, and most of us have plenty to cringe about when we look back on certain moments in our lives. However, when a person has a personality pattern of emotional immaturity, certain behaviors show up repeatedly. These behaviors are so automatic and unconscious that people are unaware of doing them. Emotionally immature people don't step back and think about how their behavior impacts others. There's no cringe factor for them, so they seldom apologize or experience regret. Defining maturity. Before we explore emotional immaturity, let's take a look at emotionally mature functioning. Emotional maturity isn't a murky matter of opinion. It has been well and famously studied. Emotional maturity means a person is capable of thinking objectively and conceptually while sustaining deep emotional connections to others. People who are emotionally mature can function independently while also having deep emotional attachments, smoothly incorporating both into their daily life. They are direct about pursuing what they want, yet do so without exploiting other people. They've differentiated from their original family relationship sufficiently to build a life of their own. Bowen, 1978. They have a well-developed sense of self. Kohut, 1985. And identity. Erickson, 1983, and treasure their closest relationships. Emotionally mature people are comfortable and honest about their own feelings and get along well with other people, thanks to their well-developed empathy, impulse control, and emotional intelligence. Goldman, 1995. They're interested in other people's inner lives and enjoy opening up and sharing with others in an emotionally intimate way. When there's a problem, they deal with others directly to smooth out differences. Referencing back to Bowen, 1978. Emotionally mature people cope with stress in a realistic, forward-looking way while consciously processing their thoughts and feelings. They can control their emotions when necessary, anticipate the future, adapt to reality, and use empathy and humor to ease difficult situations and strengthen bonds with others. Valiant, 2000. They enjoy being objective and know themselves well enough to admit their weaknesses. Siebert, 1996. I hope the whole book isn't riddled with these references. I may just say go back to the book and look them up. That's okay though. Personality traits associated with emotional immaturity. Emotionally immature people, on the other hand, tend to have quite a different set of behavioral, emotional, and mental characteristics. Because these personality characteristics are all interconnected, people who display one are often prone to the others. In the sections that follow, I'll briefly describe various characteristics of emotionally immature people. They are rigid and single-minded. As long as there's a clear path to follow, emotionally immature people can do very well, sometimes reaching high levels of success and prestige. But when it comes to relationships or emotional decisions, their immaturity becomes evident. They are either rigid or impulsive and try to cope with reality by narrowing it down to something manageable. Once they form an opinion, their minds are closed. There's one right answer, and they can become very defensive and humorless when people have other ideas. They have low stress tolerance. Emotionally mature people don't deal with stress well. Their responses are reactive and stereotyped. Instead of assessing the situation and anticipating the future, they use coping mechanisms that deny, distort, or replace reality. Valiant, 2000. They have trouble admitting mistakes and instead discount the facts and blame others. Regulating emotions is difficult for them, and they often overreact. Once they get upset, it's hard for them to calm down, and they expect other people to soothe them by doing what they want. They often seek comfort in intoxicants or medication. They do what feels best. Young children are ruled by feelings, whereas adults consider possible consequences. As we mature, we learn what feels good isn't always the best thing to do. Among emotionally immature people, however, the childhood instinct to do what feels good never really changes. Bowen, 1978. They make decisions on the basis of what feels best in the moment and often follow the path of least resistance. If you're a mature person and think before you act, you might find it hard to imagine living by what feels good in the moment. So here's an example of the jaw-dropping behavior of the emotionally immature person. Anna convinced her brother, Tom, to come with her to talk to their elderly father about going into assisted living. After visiting with their father a bit, the time came to talk seriously. Suddenly, Tom was nowhere to be found. Anna searched the house and then looked out the front window in time to see her brother getting in his car and leaving. Anna was incredulous and wondered how Tom could run out like that. But when you realize that, in that moment, walking out of the house felt much better than staying for a difficult confrontation, it makes sense. They are subjective, not objective. Emotionally immature people assess situations in a subjective way, not objectively. They don't do much dispassionate analysis. When they interpret situations, how they're feeling is more important than what is actually happening. What is true doesn't matter nearly as much as what feels true. Bowen, 1978. Trying to get a subjectively oriented person to be objective about anything is an exercise in futility. Facts, logic, history all fall on deaf ears where the emotionally immature are concerned. They have little respect for differences. Emotionally immature people are annoyed by other people's differing thoughts and opinions, believing everyone should see things their way. The idea that other people are entitled to their own point of view is beyond them. They may be prone to making social gaffes because they don't have enough awareness of other people's individuality to avoid being offensive. They're only comfortable in role-defined relationships where everyone holds the same beliefs. The quieter, nicer ones are the same, but in a quieter, nicer way. They are egocentric. Normal children are egocentric as youngsters, but the self-involvement of emotionally immature adults is more childish than childlike. Unlike children, their egocentrism lacks joy and openness. Emotionally immature people are self-preoccupied in an obsessed way, not with the innocence of a child. Young children are self-centered because they're still commanded by pure instinct, but emotionally immature adults are commanded by anxiety and insecurity, like wounded people who must keep checking their intactness. They live in a perpetual state of insecurity, fearing that they'll be exposed as bad, inadequate, or unlovable. They keep their defenses high so other people can't get close enough to threaten their shaky sense of self-worth. Before you start feeling too sorry for them, keep in mind that their defenses work seamlessly to keep these underlying anxieties below the level of awareness. They would never see themselves as being insecure or defensive. One thing I noticed the first time I was reading this book is, and she goes into this a lot in her second book, she says, if you're reading this, you may be worried if you are one of these people. And I think it's a valid concern and a valid worry. And she kind of says again and again and again, if you're reading this, even if you are one of these people, you're on the path to change. So I think that's very helpful. When you see pieces of yourself in this and you're like, oh no, I'm emotionally immature. And all of us are in some way. They are self-preoccupied and self-involved. Anxious self-preoccupation is a quality all emotionally immature people share. They're constantly monitoring whether their needs are being met or whether something has offended them. Their self-esteem rises or falls depending on how others react to them. They can't stand to be criticized, so they minimize their mistakes. Because their self-involvement is all-consuming, other people's feelings are eclipsed by their needs. For instance, after one woman told her mother how much it hurt to hear criticisms of her father, her mother said, well, if I couldn't tell you, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to. Terms like self-absorbed and narcissistic make it sound as if these people enjoy thinking about themselves all the time. But they really have no choice in the matter. They have fundamental doubts about their core worth as human beings. They are profoundly self-involved because their development was stunted by anxiety during childhood. In this way, their egocentrism is more like the self-preoccupation of someone with a chronic pain condition rather than someone who can't get enough of himself or herself. They are self-referential, not self-reflective. Emotionally immature people are highly self-referential, meaning that in any interaction, all roads lead back to them. However, they aren't self-reflective. Their focus on themselves isn't about gaining insight or self-understanding. It's about being the center of attention. As you talk to them, self-referential people will turn whatever you say back to one of their own experiences. An example would be a mother listening to her daughter describe a relationship crisis and using it as a springboard to talk about her own divorce. Another example would be parents who upstage their child's victory with recollections of their own accomplishments. Those who are more socially skilled might listen more politely, but you still won't hold their interest. They may not overtly change the subject, but they won't ask follow-up questions or express curiosity about the details of your experience. They're more likely to bring the conversation to a close with a pleasant comment that effectively ends it, such as, "That's wonderful, dear. I know you had a good time." Because they lack self-reflection, emotionally immature people don't consider their role in a problem. They don't assess their behavior or question their motives. If they caused a problem, they dismiss it by saying they didn't intend to hurt you. After all, you can't blame them for something they didn't mean to do, right? In this way, their egocentric focus remains on their intention, not the impact to you. I never realized how much reading out loud, like your tongue gets stuck. You can't talk after a while. That's why I have to keep drinking water in between. They like to be the center of attention. Like children, emotionally immature people usually end up being the center of attention. In groups, the most emotionally immature person often dominates the group's time and energy. If other people allow it, all the group's attention will go to that person, and once this happens, it's hard to redirect the group's focus. If anyone else is going to get a chance to be heard, someone will have to force an abrupt transition, something many people aren't willing to do. You may wonder whether these people are just being extroverted. They aren't. The difference is that most extroverts easily follow a change of topic. Because extroverts crave interaction, not just an audience, they're interested and receptive when others participate. Extroverts do like to talk, but not with the purpose of shutting everyone else down. They promote role reversal. Role reversal is a hallmark of emotionally immature parenting. In this case, the parent relates to the child as if the child were the parent, expecting attentiveness and comfort from the child. These parents may reverse roles and expect their child to be their confidant, even for adult matters. Parents who discuss their marriage problems with their children are an example of this kind of reversal. Other times, parents might expect their children to praise them and be happy for them, just as a child might expect from a parent. One woman I worked with, Laura, remembered her father running off with another woman, leaving Laura, then just 8 years old, to cope with her severely depressed mother on her own. One day, Laura's father picked her up in a new convertible, giddy with excitement over his new toy. He expected her to be as thrilled as he was, never considering the contrast between his joyful new life and the gloom Laura lived in with her abandoned mother. Here's another example of a father who expected his daughter to function in an approving, almost parental role in spite of his past abuse of her. Frida's story. Frida, a woman in her late 30s, had grown up in a household dominated by fear. Her father, Martin, tended to express his emotional immaturity through physical aggression. Although he was an upstanding citizen at work and in public life, at home he slapped his children and beat them with a belt to the point of leaving marks. When Frida finally stood up to him as a teenager, he stopped beating her, but he kept it up with her younger sister. He was also verbally demeaning to Frida's mother. Martin was an unpredictable man, sometimes impatient and angry, sometimes generous, happy, and loving, depending on how his day was going. But in general, rather than being a parent to his children, Martin expected them to soothe his feelings, make him the center of attention, and exhibit self-control. In a classic case of role reversal, he demanded their unconditional approval while he indulged his own moods like a child. Frida was especially the target of this role reversal, with Martin clearly expecting her to show an almost maternal love and admiration for him. For example, after Frida had moved out to her own townhouse, Martin decided she needed a porch swing, and not just any swing, but one he made himself from heavy lumber. Without asking, he had it delivered to her small deck, where it took up most of the space she had to enjoy sitting outside. It was huge and impossible to move around, which struck Frida as the perfect analogy for how Martin took up all the space in the family. He was as proud of himself as a kid who had just presented his mother with an art project. Fortunately, after understanding her father's immaturity and the dynamics involved in their role reversal, Frida felt free to have the swing removed, restoring her deck to the way she liked it. They have low empathy and are emotionally insensitive. Impaired empathy is a central characteristic of emotionally immature people, as is avoidance of emotional sharing and intimacy. Being out of touch with their own deeper feelings, they're strikingly blind to how they make other people feel. Empathy isn't just a social nicety, like being tactful. It's a necessity for true emotional intimacy. You can't have a deep relationship without it. My favorite definition of empathy comes from infant attachment researchers Klaus and Karen Grossman and Anna Schwann, who describe empathy as a sensitive mother's ability to see and feel states and intentions from the baby's point of view. 1986, 127. This definition includes being aware of both emotions and intentions. Beyond just sympathy, it entails correctly reading people's interests and how their will is being directed. The highest form of empathy requires an effort of imagination, which has been called mentalization. Fonagy and Target, 2008. Meaning the ability to imagine that other people have their own unique minds and thought to process. Developmental psychologists refer to this as having a theory of mind. Acquiring this ability is an important developmental milestone for children. Mentalizing allows you to grasp other people's viewpoints and overall inner experience because you realize they have a mind of their own, different from yours. Good parents are excellent at empathizing and mentalizing. Their interest in their child's mind makes the child feel seen and understood. It's also an indispensable characteristic for leadership in business, the military, or any situation where understanding and predicting the motives of others is central. Empathy is a bedrock component of emotional intelligence. Goleman, 1995, which is essential to social and occupational success. In his conversations with the Dalai Lama, psychologist Paul Ekman distinguished between different types of empathy and compassion. True empathy involves more than knowing what people feel. It also entails the ability to resonate with those feelings. Dalai Lama and Ekman, 2008. For example, sociopaths may do an excellent job at reading a person's emotional vulnerabilities, but without the ability to resonate with the other person's feelings, knowledge of those feelings becomes a tool for predation, not connection. This casts light on a curious fact about emotionally immature people. In spite of not resonating empathetically, they are often quite canny when it comes to reading other people's intentions and feelings. However, they don't use their understanding of people to foster an emotional intimacy. Instead, their empathy operates at an instinctual or superficially sentimental level. You feel sized up, but not felt for. Lack of resonant empathy suggests a lack of self-development. For parents to accurately imagine what their children are feeling, they need to have enough self-development to be aware of their own emotions. If they haven't developed their own emotional self-awareness, they can't resonate with how others, including their own children, might feel inside. All right, I'm done with one, and I have a backup because last time I ended up having to do part 1 and part 2 because I only had 1 cup of water and my tongue kept getting tied. See how many pages we have left. Okay, we got 6 pages left, so I think that's 15 minutes. We're at about 45 minutes a chapter. I think last week it was like 48 or something. So thank you for sticking with me if you're still with me. Why there are so many emotionally immature parents. Many of my clients have shared stories that reflect the emotional immaturity of their parents. For me, this begs the question of what could have caused so much emotional underdevelopment in so many parents. Based on my observations and clinical experience, it seems likely that the parents of many of my clients were emotionally shut down as children. Excuse me. As my clients and I have explored their family histories, they've often recalled evidence of great unhappiness and tension in their parents' early lives. Substance abuse, abandonment, loss, abuse, or traumatic immigration experiences hover in the family background, suggesting an atmosphere of loss, pain, and disconnection. Many people have told me that although they felt discounted or abused, it was nothing compared to stories their parents told about their own childhood misery. Often, the relationship between a client's mother and maternal grandmother was conflictual and unsatisfying, even though that grandmother might have become a nurturing figure for the client. It seems that many of my clients' parents never had a supportive or emotionally intimate connection with their own parents, so they developed tough defenses to survive their own emotional loneliness early in life. It's also important to remember that old school parenting, the upbringing my clients' parents experienced, was very much about children being seen but not heard. Physical punishment was not only acceptable, it was condoned, even in schools, as the way to make children responsible. For many parents, spare the rod and spoil the child was considered conventional wisdom. They weren't concerned about the children's feelings. They saw parenting as being about teaching children how to behave. It wasn't until 1946 that Dr. Benjamin Spock, in the original version of his megaseller, The Common Sense Book of Baby and Child Care, widely popularized the idea that children's feelings and individuality were important factors to consider, in addition to physical care and discipline. In the generations before this shift, parenting tended to focus on obedience as the gold standard of children's development, rather than thinking about supporting children's emotional security and individuality. In the following stories, you can see the passed down effects of this old school parenting on my clients. Ellie's story. Ellie, the oldest child in a large family, remembered her mother, Trudy, as a generous person, but hard as a rock. Trudy was active at church and in the community and had a reputation as being kind and helpful. But when it came to empathy for her children's feelings, she was impervious. Ellie had frequent nightmares and depended on a favorite stuffed animal to soothe her. One night, when Ellie was about 11 years old, her mother suddenly took her comforting stuffed animal and said, "I'm giving this away. You're too old for this." When Ellie begged her mother not to, Trudy told her she was being ridiculous. Although Trudy took good care of Ellie physically, she had no feeling for Ellie's emotional attachment to a precious toy. Ellie was also deeply attached to a cat who had been in the